I always thought marriage was supposed to be the safe place, the one bond where I could rest and feel seen, but with Samir it quickly became something else. In the beginning, he was present, attentive in the way newly married men often are, but as time passed, his attention thinned like mist. Days turned into weeks where his only concern was work, his phone, his friends. I tried to ignore it at first, convincing myself it was just the way men were, but deep down I began to starve for something more, something as simple as being asked how I felt, or having my hand held when no one else was watching. My voice in the house grew quieter, not because I didn't want to speak, but because no one was listening. Then there was Imran, his father. He was nothing like Samir, or maybe I only noticed it because I had stopped expecting anything from my husband. He carried himself with a certain weight, not just of years but of understanding. He asked me questions no one else bothered to, about how I managed the house, about my own family, about the little things that made up my day. At first, I thought it was simply his way of being kind, filling the silence his son left behind. But the more he lingered in conversations, the more I began to realize that what I was receiving from him were pieces of what I had longed for all along. That it started with small compliments. He would tell me the food tasted better when I cooked it, that I managed the home with a grace most women lacked, that I carried myself with a patience he admired. They seemed harmless, yet they landed where they weren't supposed to, deep in the space that Samir's neglect had hollowed out. I told myself not to take them seriously, but I found myself waiting for them, measuring my day by whether he had noticed me. Guilt tugged at me even in those early days. I reminded myself constantly that he was not just another man, but the father of the man I had promised my life to. Yet every time I reasoned with myself, another moment came that blurred the lines further. A longer pause between his words, a look that held me just a second too long, or a silence that felt more charged than it should. I could sense something shifting, but I didn't know how to stop it, and in truth, I didn't want to. Samir remained oblivious. His absence wasn't just physical. Even when he sat across from me at the table, his mind was elsewhere. He asked nothing, he shared nothing, and I began to feel as though I was invisible to him. The contrast between the man I married and the man who fathered him grew sharper by the day. Imran's presence became the echo of everything I missed, and soon I was confiding in him things I had never dared to voice aloud. That I told him of my loneliness, of how I struggled to feel like I belonged in my own marriage. He listened without judgment, nodding, sometimes offering words of encouragement, sometimes simply sitting in silence as though holding space for me was enough. And in that silence, I found comfort I hadn't known in years. There were nights I lay awake, replaying his words, his tone, the way he made me feel understood. It was dangerous territory, and I knew it, but the danger itself had a pull. The first boundary crossed was not obvious, not something that could be defined by a single action. It was in the way his hand lingered on mine when passing me a glass, the way his eyes searched my face for longer than necessary, the way his presence filled the room in a way my husband's never did. It was subtle, yet undeniable. That day, when he looked at me and said softly, almost as though confessing a secret, that I deserved more than what life had given me, I felt a shiver run through me. No one had said words like that to me in years, and I didn't know whether to recoil or lean closer. From that moment, I could no longer deny what was forming between us. It wasn't just harmless talk or simple kindness. It was a thread pulling tighter each day, weaving a closeness that I should never have allowed, but one that I could not resist. I carried the weight of knowing exactly what path I was on, yet I stepped forward anyway, telling myself that it was only words, only moments, that nothing irreversible had happened. But deep down, I knew the line had already been crossed, and with every passing day, that line blurred further, leaving me both terrified and strangely alive. I told myself again and again that it would stop at words, that the comfort I sought would never spill beyond the quiet exchanges and glances that had already gone too far. But boundaries are fragile things, and once bent, they rarely return to their original shape. The distance that once felt safe began to shrink. He no longer needed excuses to linger, and I no longer tried to hide the way I anticipated his presence. What I once feared as impossible was now becoming inevitable, and I let it unfold as though it were outside my control. The first time it happened, it was not planned, not spoken of, not even imagined so clearly until it was already real. The house was quiet, the air heavy with unspoken tension, and everything I had been resisting gave way to a single decision. In that moment, I betrayed not only my husband but also myself, yet the guilt came hand in hand with a flood of release, as though every hunger I had buried for years had been answered at once. It wasn't love, not in the way people talk about love, but it was recognition, attention, validation, all wrapped in a forbidden form. Afterward, I sat with the weight of it pressing down on me. I told myself it would be the last time, that the shock of what had happened would be enough to pull me back to reason. But the truth was different. Once the line was crossed, it didn't feel like a line anymore. It became a space I stepped into again and again, each time carrying the sting of guilt yet also the intoxicating pull of desire. He had become the answer to everything I had been denied, and even as shame whispered in my ear, I reached for him whenever the chance arose. Samir noticed changes, though not enough to draw conclusions. He asked once why I seemed distracted, why my eyes drifted when he spoke, why I was quieter than usual. I brushed it off with simple lies, ones he accepted because he wanted to believe them. His lack of suspicion became the very shield behind which everything continued. The irony cut deep, that the man who should have known me best was the one least able to see what was unfolding right in front of him. The secrecy grew heavier by the day. Every moment with Imran was followed by hours of guilt, fear that someone would notice, that the walls themselves would speak. Yet the danger only sharpened the intensity. Each stolen interaction was layered with the knowledge that discovery would ruin everything, and that very risk gave it a power nothing else in my life had. It was reckless, and I knew it, but reason was no longer strong enough to fight the need that had taken hold of me. That I began to live two lives, one as the dutiful wife who kept the house, greeted her husband, smiled when expected, the other as a woman who surrendered to something she knew she had no right to. The division was exhausting, and at times, I felt as though I might collapse under the weight of it. I would wake in the middle of the night, staring at the ceiling, wondering how long before the truth emerged. Yet, when morning came, I still found myself seeking him again, as if pulled by a force I could not resist. There were close calls. A door opening too suddenly, footsteps in the hallway at the wrong time, neighbors who watched too closely. Each near discovery left me shaken, promising myself it would end before everything collapsed. But then the hunger would rise again, stronger than resolve, and I would give in once more. I told myself that maybe I could manage it, that as long as I was careful, as long as no one knew, it could continue without consequence. That lie kept me moving forward, even when I knew the end was already written in the shadows. Imran himself was not free from fear. I saw it in the way his eyes sometimes flicked toward the door, in the way he hesitated afterward as though weighing the cost of what we were doing. But he never stopped, and neither did I. Whatever doubts we carried were always silenced by the pull of the moment, the unspoken agreement that we both needed something we could not find anywhere else. With each passing day, I felt myself sinking deeper into something irreversible. I was no longer just a wife drifting away from her husband. I was a woman caught in a secret that grew larger with every choice I made. The walls of the house seemed to know, the silence of the night seemed to hold the weight of what I had done. I carried it with me in every look, every word, every breath, knowing that the longer it lasted, the closer the end would come, and still, I continued. Because no matter how wrong it was, no matter how heavy the guilt, the truth was simple. I had tasted something that made me feel alive again, and I could not let it go. The weight of secrets has a way of pressing harder the longer they are carried. What once felt thrilling began to feel suffocating. I noticed changes in him first: Imran's tone, his hesitation, the way he lingered less than before. He began speaking of caution, of how dangerous it was, of how eyes were everywhere and how easily one mistake could undo everything. His words carried fear, but beneath them, I could sense regret creeping in. Where once he had been the steady hand that guided me into this, now he was the one pulling away, leaving me stranded in the storm we had created. For the first time, I felt abandoned twice over, by the husband who had never seen me, and by the man who had awakened something in me only to retreat when the weight of it grew heavy. I tried to reason with myself, to say it was for the best, that ending it now might save what little remained of my marriage, but the truth was more complex. The damage was already done, and deep down, I knew there was no way back to who I had been before. Samir began noticing more. At first, it was subtle questions about why I seemed withdrawn, why my tone shifted when his father entered the room. He asked if I was unwell, if something was bothering me, and I gave him the same shallow reassurances as before. But his eyes lingered on me differently now, as though searching for something he could not name. The safety I once relied on, his blind trust, began to erode. Every word I spoke felt as though it carried the risk of exposure. Every movement watched more closely than before. The truth unraveled not in a dramatic confession but in the slow accumulation of signs that could no longer be ignored. A slip of timing, a sentence overheard, a silence that lasted too long, all of it stitched together until the picture became clear. The day he confronted me, I saw in his eyes not just suspicion but certainty, a certainty that cut sharper than any accusation could. He didn't ask with anger, not at first. He asked with a quietness that shook me, as if part of him still hoped to be wrong. In that moment, I had no words to defend myself. The silence between us was answer enough, and the look on his face shifted from confusion to devastation. There are many ways to break a man, and betrayal from within his own home is one that leaves a scar no time can erase. He turned from me not in rage but in disbelief, as though the very ground beneath him had given way. I tried to speak, to explain, but what excuse could possibly soften the truth? There are no justifications that can erase betrayal, only the echo of choices that can never be undone. Imran's role in it all did not remain hidden. The confrontation extended beyond husband and wife, bleeding into father and son. The bond between them, built over a lifetime, fractured in an instant. Samir's voice, once respectful, turned cold, and the man he had looked up to became a stranger before his eyes. No matter what words were exchanged, no matter what reasons Imran tried to offer, the fact remained immovable. He had crossed the one line that could never be repaired. The house itself changed after that. Every corner carried the weight of what had been discovered. Conversations became clipped, meals were silent, footsteps heavy with unspoken anger. The air felt poisoned, as though every breath reminded us all of what had been lost. I no longer belonged in my own home, and the man who had once made me feel seen now avoided my eyes as though ashamed of the very connection that had drawn us together. Guilt consumed me, not in fleeting waves but as a constant tide. I looked at Samir and saw not only the husband I had betrayed but the man who had trusted me without question. I looked at Imran and saw not the warmth I once craved but the wreckage of a family torn apart. And I looked at myself and saw a woman who had traded loyalty for moments of fleeting attention, only to be left with ashes in her hands. There was no forgiveness waiting, no possibility of returning to what had been. Some truths, once spoken or discovered, changed the course of life forever. The silence between us became permanent, not the silence of comfort but the silence of endings. Samir no longer sought answers, because the answers were already written in every memory that could not be erased. Imran withdrew into his own shadow, and I remained trapped between the two, carrying the knowledge that I had destroyed them both in different ways. What remains after betrayal is not just broken trust but the haunting awareness that nothing will ever be the same. I often replay the choices in my mind, wondering if there was a moment where I could have stepped back, drawn a line, saved what mattered. But regret does not undo action. It lingers, sharp and unrelenting, a constant reminder of the night I allowed myself to cross into a place I should never have entered. The story does not end with reconciliation, nor with forgiveness. It ends with distance, with hearts that no longer speak the same language, with a home that no longer feels like shelter. My truth is simple yet unbearable. One act of betrayal became a chain of consequences that shattered everything around me. And though I still wake each day and move through the motions of life, I carry with me the knowledge that nothing will ever restore what was lost. One choice was all it took, and nothing has been the same since. There is a certain silence that follows destruction, a stillness so heavy it feels louder than any argument. That silence filled my days after everything came undone. It was not the silence of peace or reconciliation but the silence of absence, of doors closed in spirit though still standing in wood and stone. Samir no longer looked at me with anger, nor with sorrow, but with indifference, and that indifference cut more deeply than his rage ever could. It was the final proof that I had lost whatever place I once held in his life, that he moved around me as if I were a stranger, a figure inhabiting the same house without claim to it. There were no questions, no demands, not even the bitter release of shouted words. His silence said it all. He no longer cared enough to fight. That realization weighed heavier than the guilt I already carried. I had not only broken his trust, I had extinguished his love. Imran, too, retreated into shadows. Once bold enough to step across the lines of morality, he now shrank away from the reality of what he had done. He could not face his son without seeing the betrayal reflected back at him, and he could not face me without recalling the choices that had led us here. Where once he sought me out, now he avoided even the accidental brush of presence, leaving me in a limbo where the very man who had awakened something in me now embodied only regret. The house became a place of ghosts. Every room carried memories I could not bear to revisit. The kitchen where laughter once existed now felt suffocating. The hallway whispered with footsteps of suspicion. The bedroom turned into a hollow shell of pretense. I found myself wandering without purpose, replaying the past in my mind, but no matter how many times I revisited it, there was no path that led back. Regret is a cruel companion. It never allows rest, it never loosens its grip. Each day it reminded me of the choice I had made, of the moment I could have said no but instead said yes, of the hunger that blinded me to consequence. I had sought attention, validation, the feeling of being alive, and in exchange, I had burned the ground beneath my feet. Now, all that remained was ash, and even that ash carried the bitter taste of shame. Friends and neighbors noticed changes too. Whispers carried in the air, subtle glances exchanged, questions unspoken but implied. Though no one said it aloud, I could feel their eyes measuring the distance between words and truth. Isolation grew not just within the walls of my home but outside it as well. I no longer belonged to the circle I once moved in. I had marked myself with choices that could never be unseen. Samir spoke less with each passing day, until eventually he spoke not at all. He lived in the same space, yet he was already gone, his heart detached, his trust buried. I thought of leaving many times, of packing what little pride I still held and walking away, but something inside me clung to the wreckage as though leaving would make the ruin even more complete. I stayed, not out of love or hope, but out of paralysis, trapped between what had been and what could never be again. 18 night, the weight of silence pressed hardest. The hours stretched long, and in the darkness, memory replayed itself endlessly. I remembered the first glance that lasted too long, the first word that felt different, the first time I crossed the line I had sworn I never would. I remembered the rush, the thrill, the hunger that drowned out reason. And I remembered the moment of discovery, the collapse of trust, the look in Samir's eyes when he realized the truth. Those memories looped endlessly, each one reminding me that my undoing had been of my own making. Imran eventually withdrew completely, visiting less, speaking less, until he became a ghost of his former self. Whatever connection had once existed between us now carried nothing but poison, and he knew it. His presence was a reminder neither of us could bear. The distance grew, not out of choice but out of necessity, as though silence was the only penance left to us. Time passed, but healing never came. Some wounds do not close, they remain raw, aching beneath the skin, flaring with every memory. I no longer sought forgiveness, because forgiveness was impossible. What I sought instead was endurance, the ability to wake each day and carry the weight without breaking beneath it. Yet even endurance felt fragile, as though one wrong breath might shatter it all over again. The truth is simple, though unbearable. One choice set fire to everything I held, and nothing survived unscarred. I destroyed trust, I fractured love, I broke the bond between father and son. And now, all that remains is the emptiness left in the aftermath, a silence that will echo long after words have faded. I live inside that silence, a reminder to myself of what desire can cost when it blinds you to consequence. That I once believed infidelity was just an act, a moment of weakness or desire. Now I know it is more than that. It is a chain reaction, a wave that destroys not only the bonds between two people but the foundation of an entire life. And once that wave has passed, there is nothing left to rebuild upon. Only the ruins, and the silence that follows.